it's Dr. Dunaway here with Chiro Strength, and today's video is going to be very dense. There's going to be several different hip mobility drills for the inside, outside, front, back hamstrings, all geared towards allowing the hips and pelvis to move independently of the low back, because we all know that low back pain can be generated or at least aggravated by tight hips, and you're going to have a really hard time recovering from any low back pain issue, whether it's disc or a facet issue or strain, sprain of a ligament or tendon, if we don't have good mobility in the hips and good control of the lumbo-pelvic complex. And these stretches can really help you with that. We're going to start in a half kneeling position, go to a quadruped position, end up in the seated position, and then we're going to go all the way back to this half kneeling position to kind of finish things off in a little more active setting. You can use one of these stretches, all of these stretches. More than likely, you'll be tight in certain areas, so you might find that certain stretches are a little better for you. So just practice all of these, go back and forth through this video, and then see which ones work best for you using some of these simple cues. So to start, we're going to get hip flexor and hamstring. So whichever one you want to start with, I tend to start in this half kneeling position with my right knee down. I feel like my right hip flexor is a little more tighter than my left traditionally. So it's important, I'm using this slider right here just to put under my knee for a little comfort here. A hip flexor stretch is going to be a posterior tilt. By posterior tilt, what I mean is in this position, if I posterior tilt, I tuck my butt like this. An anterior tilt would be pushing my belly button to the floor and getting more of an arch in my back. And if I don't posterior tilt on this hip flexor stretch, I'm going to wind out all the way over here like this, stretching maybe the anterior capsule, but really getting a lot of lumbar extension. So I'm going to focus the movement here. Posterior tilt, lean forward just a little bit. My knee is pretty much directly over my ankle, so this is a good alignment for you to shoot for. You can see my hip is the fulcrum of the movement here. And then I can lean away from this hip and then turn in towards this hip and get a really good stretch. Take a few breaths and then come out of it and sit there for about 30 seconds or move straight to the hamstring stretch, which I like doing with a little dorsiflexion of the ankle, keeping a bend in the knee, going from a posterior tilt for the hip flexor and then going to anterior tilt. You'll see my butt go back towards my heel, and now I got a good stretch on the hamstring. Turning my toe out or turning my toe in at this point can give me a good inner or outer stretch on the hamstring. And if I want to get higher or lower in the hamstring, change the bend in the knee. This is a big bend in the knee right here, and if I anterior tilt and lean forward real far, now that hamstring stretch is really high. And so I can get the hip flexion and the hamstring stretch in this position right here, kind of going back and forth for a minute, and then switching up and getting the other side for another minute. From there, I'm going to go into this quadruped position. My knees are going to go pretty wide, and I'm going to try and keep a good arch in my back or a good anterior tilt. And what we're going to start with is a few seconds of rocking back and forth like this. The important thing here is that as we rock back, we don't tuck the butt like this. What you'll notice in a lot of squat patterns, as the hip starts to flex, the body has learned to kind of round the back to give you a little more depth in your squat, because you might be trying to force a deep squat, or you just might have learned how to move like that. But we need hip flexion without the additional lumbar flexion. So this is a great just motor control strategy right before a squat. And you can kind of depend on how deep you're going or what your squat pattern is. That would depend how wide your knees are. But for a stretch component, we're going to get as wide as we comfortably can and spend a couple seconds just like this, and then take this foot straight out to the side. And if I'm from the side view here, this foot and this knee are pretty much in alignment. And now I try to keep my anterior tilt, and as I rock back, I'm trying to rock straight back, so I'm not going over to this down leg, but rock straight back, and you should feel a good stretch through this leg here. If I want to add a little additional hamstring, I can just let the toe come up, and as I let the toe come up, that'll be a little bit more targeted to the hamstring. In this position, in this quadruped position, I can also reach my foot up towards the ceiling and come into internal rotation, rock back, internal rotation, rock back, and do a couple reps like this. Now my goal here is to keep my torso nice and still and stable, getting as much active internal rotation as I can, and you should feel that in the hip when you really peel that up into internal rotation, and then slowly fall over at the last second to try to get that hip pocket to the ground. But that's going to be a good way to get the adductors, hamstrings, and additional internal rotation in there as well. And then the last one, we're going to be in a 90 and 90 position. So if I'm sideways like this, this femur and this femur make a 90-degree angle here. My sternum is facing right towards the same direction as the knee, and my knee here makes a 90-degree angle. My knee here is bent to 90 degrees. So that's the 90 and 90. Just like the hamstring stretch, I'm going to anteriorly tilt the pelvis, use this hand over here as a little support so I don't feel like I'm trying to stretch like this. Lean over, allow yourself to be nice and upright, and as I lean forward, if I can keep that anterior tilt, I feel a good stretch in the posterior hip here, and then I can try to continue to rotate to wind up that posterior chain, and then kind of lean a little bit over this knee. But as I do that, you can see the position of my spine. What most people will do is they'll round their back and flex, and they'll get all the way over here. They're like, I don't feel the stretch, because I don't feel any stretch right here. But if I control my lumbar spine, extend it, and anteriorly tilt the pelvis and lean forward, I get a stretch right away. So from this point, what we can do is a couple active mobility drills. I really like kind of transitioning from side to side after we've stretched both hips, trying to keep my spine nice and upright, trying to get this hip as far out this way as possible before this one starts to come over, and transition a few times. Or right before a warm-up or right before a lift, I'll start to go through the shin box get up to where I lean forward. So I get in the shin box position. I go from the 90 and 90 like this. Just touch this foot on this quad right here. Lean forward. And now I can go through some good shin box get ups right before I start to lift. And that's a really good way to warm up these hips. I know it's a lot. You can use some, you can use all. It should take about 5 to 6 minutes to get through all of that stuff, spending about 30 to 60 seconds in each position. But that's a really good way, a good effective way to hit all kinds of hip mobility. And if you have any questions with that, just shoot a comment below. You can always reach me at drdunaway@chirostrength.com. That's my email. And let me know what else you want to see. Hopefully this is helpful. And like I always say, don't just mend, transcend. Thanks.